about what I'm teaching on? One. I'm a little worried about what I'm teaching on. Thinking back over your childhood all the way up into your adulthood, think of the people you knew or the marriages you can recall where there a lot more, where there was maybe a godly wife, and then there was a husband who maybe was a real scoundrel out drinking and carrying on, or just tuned out, maybe sat in front of the TV and just didn't participate very much, helped produce the children maybe, or maybe went out and worked and helped bring home the bacon or whatever. But that was pretty much all he contributed to the marriage. He was just kind of tuned out. Were there more of those that you remember than a really turned on for God husband and a wife who was either tuned out or running around being a scoundrel? Was it weighted more that way? Is that what you remember? That's what I remember. As the people I know as I grew up, I can remember it more that way. There's a reason for that. It goes back to the garden. And maybe we can explain that today. And the portion, are you ready, Pete? Pete's ready. We're ready to go. The portion today is Vayera. And for those who are listening by Israelnet, it's Genesis 18:1 through 22:24. And for a Haftorah, we read Isaiah 51:1 through 16. We read Psalm 111. And we just got through reading 1 Peter 3. And go ahead and read the whole chapter if you're listening. It'll help you. In fact, read the preceding chapter. Go ahead and read chapter 2 because it sets up what's being said in chapter 3. Because chapter 3 is really addressing ideal conditions where there's a better chance of there being a believing husband and wife working together. Chapter 2 addresses slaves, the relationship of slaves to their masters, and we know that sometimes it's not an ideal relationship. Sometimes you feel like you're living like a slave in a household. And Peter addresses that relationship as well, and in that case he says, do the best you can. And that's why the chapter opens up, and he says, and in the same way, you wives, because he's just following up on a message to slaves who were living under a taskmaster. And so he's trying to make the best out of a bad situation. But the portion is, the Lord appeared. He appeared. He appeared to Abraham. He appeared to Sarah. And he brings the promise of a child. But there's some interesting things that occur with this promise, and it teaches us a lot about the relationship between a husband and a wife. And Jimmy taught you a little bit about praise and worship. How many of you think praise and worship begins when you walk through those doors? No. It starts in your house. It starts before you ever arrive. Starts before you get in your vehicle. It starts in the home. So much can occur before we ever arrive here that will impact our praise and our worship services. Yes, it matters what we do when we arrive, but so much can occur. How many of you, if you're going to have one fight in a week, it's going to occur before you arrive here on Shabbat morning? Oh, yeah. If the kids are going to act out, they're going to act out on Shabbat morning before you arrive. It's just, that's the way it is. But it's natural for that to happen, and that's what our Torah portion is going to teach us. Why do people lie? It's natural for them to lie. Ever since Adam and Eve sinned, it's a natural thing. Why are people afraid? It's natural. Ever since Adam and Eve sinned, it's natural to be afraid. It says Sarah laughed when she heard that she would have a child. Now, whether she just laughed internally and the Lord heard that laugh, I don't know, or whether she audibly laughed and everyone heard it and turned and looked and said, why did Sarah laugh? I don't know. I don't really get that from the text. But who could blame her? I mean, at the age of 90, if the 1,000th person comes along and says you're going to have a child, and trust me, I know how many people will come into your life and tell you, well, I think you're going to have a child. I know. But Adonai challenges her, and he has the right to, because after all, he is God. And he says, why did you laugh? And she says, I didn't laugh. Now, you can get away with lying to a lot of people, but God's not one of them, because he knows when you're lying. But she's a prophetess. She's a righteous woman, and yet she lies to God. We lie to ourselves all the time, don't we? We lie to God too, because if we lie to ourselves, we'll lie to him. Just because we're trying to live a godly life, just because we have a gift of prophecy, does not mean that we will not turn right around under pressure and lie. We will do it sometimes. The text says that Sarah lied for she was frightened. When we are frightened about something, we will lie. If we say we don't lie, we're lying because we lie. What was she scared of? She was scared of another disappointment. How many people in her lifetime had told us it was just around the corner? Next month, you're going to conceive. She was afraid of the failure of the flesh. 90 years, her body had failed her. The looks, the gossip, the pity. This is so often why we lie, because we're afraid and we're self-conscious. This is why we lie to ourselves. This is why we lie to God. Maybe this is why we lie to other people. We want to protect ourselves. We want to protect our nakedness, and that's our inabilities, our weaknesses. We're afraid of what people will think about us. We're afraid of what people will say about us. And so that's our question today. Not just ladies, but men too. It affects men as well. What or who are we afraid of? And how is it affecting not just our marriages? Maybe some of us aren't married yet. How is it affecting our future marriages? But more importantly than that, how is it affecting our growth in the Spirit of God? That's what really matters. Because how we grow in the Spirit of God will affect our marriages. It will affect all our relationships. That spirit of fear causes us to strive against the Spirit of God and to doubt His Word. That's why we need to understand it. Fear is an overdose of self-consciousness. That's what it is. It's that being so focused on the self that the spirit of reverence, which is the spirit of the Sabbath, by the way, the spirit of fear, we call it, but it's actually more a spirit of reverence of Adonai, not just horrible fear. That's the flip side of it. If you don't fear God, you're going to have the other type of fear, that fear of what people will think about you or say about you. But the Sabbath has a spirit of reverence. It was the seventh day. It was a spirit that moved on the seventh day. And it's a spirit of reverence of Adonai, meaning it's a spirit of obedience. There's a special spirit of obedience that moves on the Sabbath. And when we move in that spirit on the Sabbath, it is designed to help us overcome a spirit of fear, as it means in the negative sense. If we truly have a spirit of the Sabbath, it will cause us to focus on Adonai and His will. And once we're focused on Him, our eyes go off of ourself. We lose our self-consciousness and we become God-conscious, and we lose that negative spirit of fear. We quit thinking about what people will say about us. We quit thinking about what people think about us. We don't worry about it because we're so focused on Him. And that's why our Sabbaths are so important to us, because it helps us to focus outward on Him and ministering to His people rather than thinking about me, which is, often what we do in the work week. We're trying to provide for ourselves. See that that flip side of it, that self-consciousness, spirit of fear, it will always compel us to have the last word, which is not the word, but the word of the natural man. It's the word of the flesh speaking, I did not lie. That's the spirit of fear speaking. That spirit of reverence will remove self-consciousness. It will raise your God consciousness. Now, how does that combat the spirit of fear? It's because of that natural rule of sin in our lives. It took control of our hearts. It took control of our flesh when Adam and Eve lost their reverence for Adonai. You can tell someone has lost their reverence from Adonai when they begin to disobey his commandments. That's easy. That's not hard to figure out. And you'll notice when they sinned, immediately they were what? Afraid and ashamed because they were naked. They were exposed. They became self-conscious of their nakedness. Immediately they needed a covering. Something would have to die in order to conceal their sin and their fear. The knowledge of good would no longer come naturally to them, but they would have to strive to overcome the knowledge of foolishness that would seem more natural. See, that's the horrible thing about the fall, is that foolishness seems more natural to us than the Spirit of God. So now we have to strive to overcome the knowledge of foolishness, even though it sets us in opposition to the Spirit of God who created us. It should feel more natural to be in congruence with or to work in harmony with the Spirit of God, but it doesn't. It strives against that natural man. Adonai said in Genesis 8:21, the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth. From the time we are children, our natural man is striving against his spirit. So how does this apply to our children? Children are naturally filled with foolishness. That's not encouraging, is it, parents? Well, that's why he picked you, to drive it far from them. They can, however, be brought to a healthy maturity when you creatively use the Spirit of God. That's why he chose you as their parents, so that the Spirit of God could work through you to creatively use discipline in their lives. Proverbs 22:15 says, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. That word for bound up is kesher in Hebrew, and it means entwined. I mean, it's really in there. Really in there. If something is kesher, it's really connected. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of discipline will remove it far from him. So it's your job as a parent to try to disconnect that natural foolishness out of the heart of your child and drive it far from him. It has a natural attachment to your child when he is born. It's not his fault. You can't blame the child. He's born that way. You were born that way. I was born that way. Everyone since Adam and Eve have been born that way. But the disciplines are the creative boundaries of the Spirit we talked about week before last when we discussed global warming. Remember, there were 7 spirits of God that moved at the creation, one specific one on each day. And they weren't just arbitrary boundaries, they were actually boundaries that made the creation good. And if we learn to work within those creative boundaries, then what comes forth is life, protection, and goodness. It made the creation useful for man and good for man. And so when the parents can set these creative boundaries with the loving authority of the Creator, then what they are doing is helping that child to rectify his personal fall from the Garden of Eden. Every child has already fallen. Remember that foolishness, it's already there. They are preparing that child to respect the spiritual commandment of the Creator. Is what they are doing by setting these creative boundaries. 1 Corinthians 2:14 says, but a natural man does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, and he cannot understand them because they are spiritually appraised or understood. So teaching your child respect is a spiritual exercise. You think saying no, no to a 3-year-old is just saying no, no, but it's not. It is a spiritual exercise. You are setting a creative boundary in that child's life that is designed to penetrate the foolishness of his heart, the foolishness of that natural man that was placed in there in the Garden of Eden. Well, actually, as they left it, it was connected in there. What we want to do is we want to restore the Torah as his natural affection. Because when he's born, it is not natural for him to love the Torah. We have to restore that. Sin has made it an unnatural affection for him. Until Yeshua totally regenerates our bodies, we all struggle. It's not a natural affection for us. But can that commandment actually be spiritual? Because we've been taught much of our lives that the law is bondage. It's a horrible thing to go back under bondage. But Paul even says, yes, that commandment is spiritual. That's why we have to restore that child's affection toward the Torah. It says in Romans 7:14, for we know that the Torah is spiritual, but I am of flesh, sold into bondage to sin. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to reverse things here. The parent wants to instill the spirit of Adonai as his child's inheritance, not an inheritance of the flesh that is going to struggle with a spiritual commandment. You see what we're doing? Pulling out that foolishness that says the Torah is bondage and trying to restore a natural affection for a spiritual commandment. Proverbs 14:18, it says, the naive inherit foolishness, but the sensible are crowned with knowledge. We want your children to have a crown of knowledge as their inheritance. What does that mean to your child's growth in the Spirit? It means that you as a parent are actually trying to produce an unnatural growth. It's not easy. By the sweat of your brow, he said, Adam, you're going to bring forth bread. And you know what? As parents, by the sweat of your brow, you are going to bring forth the Spirit of God in your children. It will not be easy because it is unnatural for that spiritual growth to occur. When Adam sinned, things that should have come naturally ceased to do so. And now it's going to require a lot of labor on your part to release that bondage to sin. Part of which is foolishness that will reject the spiritual things of God. It's just natural for us to reject it. However, if we're looking at the 7 spirits of God, and we know that the reverence of Adonai is the beginning of wisdom, and wisdom leads to understanding, and understanding leads to counsel, and counsel leads to power, and power leads to knowledge, which is the final spirit before that cycle begins anew, then knowledge is indeed the crown of a sensible child's inheritance. That's what you're doing. You're instilling them with the 7 spirits of God. And it starts with the foundation of how you teach that child to respect you as your father and mother. And that way you put him on the course to attain that crown of knowledge. And that will lead him to knowing Adonai in an intimate way. Remember me saying there is no intimacy without obedience? And then I pulled my foot back out of it because I didn't want to get into it at that time. There's a balanced message there, and I didn't want people running around saying one part of it without the balance in it. Because we've had enough of that already out in the church and the synagogue world both. You want that child to feel the intimate presence of Adonai, don't you? Isn't that what the inheritance you want for your children or your grandchildren? Then you must teach them respect for you as their parents. That's where they will learn it first. And then they will understand what it is like to develop that relationship with the Father. Now, the discipline that will drive foolishness from the heart of a child is a special Hebrew word. It's Mussar. That word means a prohibition. It's a no-no. It's a limit. It's a boundary. It's an exercise of parental authority. It's not beating your child. That's not what it means. I mean, if you want to spank your child, that's fine. However, that's not really the essence of that scripture. Adonai is pointing you back to the creative boundaries of his seven spirits. If we work within those boundaries, we are going to have abundant life and we are going to have good life. If we strive against them, we are going to have uncleanness, we are going to have a miserable life, and eventually we're going to have death. That's what you have to think about when you discipline your children and set the boundaries. So by the very nature of creation, when you set boundaries for your children, they have to be creative. They have to be spirit-filled boundaries. If these boundaries are purely arbitrary, then they may not bring forth life. They may not be creative. If they're simply punishments, if they're simply the product of anger or frustration or some other spirit that is not creative, that is not part of those seven spirits of God, if they're not put there in order to protect the life of the child and to nurture it, then instead of driving away the foolishness from the heart of that child, what you might be doing is actually adding to the foolishness things like resentment, fear, anger, and all sorts of unclean spirits. See, that's the difference between punishment and discipline. What's the root word of discipline? Disciple. You're teaching them something. You're teaching them the Spirit of God. Punishment just makes people angry. Have you ever been punished and you walked away and you felt angry because you didn't feel like you deserved what you got? And you knew the difference because you had been disciplined before, and you walked away and you thought, well, that was pretty harsh, but I had it coming. That's the difference. You have a sense of justice inside you that knows the difference. If someone has ever beaten you or spanked you out of anger, you know the difference between that. And I've had belt whippings where I had it coming and I knew I had it coming, but I did it anyway because I didn't mind. It was worth the whipping. I used to get in trouble routinely for sneaking down to the barn. It was okay because I knew I had it coming and I was willing to lay down my bottom in order to go to the barn. It was okay. You know, that was justice. I knew I had it coming. But there have been times when I had a spanking where it was simply out of my mother's frustration and anger, and I knew that it wasn't really something I did that brought her to that point. It was something that happened over here with someone else, and I just happened to be the next person that walked in the room. And you knew inside you didn't deserve all that. You know, you might have rolled your eyes, but my goodness. So inside we know the difference. Some disciplines are creative. You know, and you can tell discipline because if you do have to spank the child, or after the time out, a lot of times they might be crying, but they'll come straight to you, they'll crawl up in your lap, and they'll bury that head up in your neck, and they might snuffle for half an hour, but they're okay. A punishment, they don't necessarily want to be around you anymore. I've seen that. You scare them. They're frightened of you. They don't want to be around you anymore. Steely probably deals with a lot of that in his work, where you just simply scare the child. You frighten them, and they get to an age finally where they become rebellious, and they'll just run away from home, or they might give it back to you. So we have to make sure our discipline is creative. It's bringing life. It's setting limits that are going to actually let the Spirit of God move in their lives. What do parents contribute? It is your obligation to keep the child on this course, to drive away the foolishness of the flesh so that they can inherit spiritual knowledge. Mothers and fathers should operate in all seven spirits of Adonai. But today we read about two special ones, the spirits of knowledge and reverence. 1 Peter 3 admonishes men to live with their wives according to knowledge. Remember, knowledge is the spirit of the sixth day of creation. It's associated with Yom Kippur. And he admonishes wives to submit to and reverence their husbands. And he uses Sarah and Abraham as examples. Reverence, the spirit of reverence, is associated with the seventh day of creation, or the Sabbath, rest. So, I'm going to talk to husbands and wives. And I'm going to try to do it gently and meekly. I didn't want to, but Lori made me. And if at any point it's too harsh and you can't take any more, just raise your hand and say, I can't take any more, please stop. And I'll stop. Husbands, I haven't said anything still. Just do like this. There you go. We won't take ladies first, we'll take husbands first, since the spirit of knowledge, the sixth day preceded the seventh. And Adam was created first, wasn't he? Men don't function so well in the spirit of knowledge as they did before the fall. They used to. You know how we know? Because Adonai brought the animals to Adam. And he said, you look at these creatures and you tell me what I'm supposed to call them. Now, he was perfectly able to name the creatures himself, but see, Adam had such an intuition. He could look at a creature and he would say, giraffe, because he just knew its essence. That is a giraffe. From the top of that long neck down to those hooves, screams giraffe. Adam knew it was a giraffe because he intuitively had a spirit of knowledge. He could discern that. He was trusted to name the entire creation. He knew the essence of the soul. But since the fall, have you noticed that men are much more practical about animals and everything else? They're much more analytical. Now he can look at a creature and he starts analyzing, how can I capture it? How can I hunt it? How can I use it? How can I fence it in? How can I bend it to my will and train it to make it do what I want it to do? They're not as puppy-fied as women are. We just want to hug it and squeeze it and hold it and, love on it. And they can be like that, but they're much more practical in their approach to the creation. The spirit of knowledge truly knows and builds understanding in a relationship, so that the true spirit of knowledge intuitively knows the essence of the bride. The spirit of knowledge knows her name. Notice how many times Yeshua speaks to the bride as though he is calling her by name and even gives her a new name. And that refers to understanding someone based not only on their deeds, but the essence of those deeds and what produces the personality, the characteristics, and the character, if you want to call it that. He appreciates the essence of that soul instead of trying to capture it, hunt it, or bend it to live within his fences. It's love that goes beyond the physical, love that goes beyond the obvious. It is deep sacrificial love as on Yom Kippur, a love of death. It is Messiah's love that would rather suffer for the bride and cover her with his own blood than allow her to take the judgment and the suffering for her own guilt. That's the spirit of knowledge. That's the true creation spirit of knowledge. Relationship is the key to understanding the spirit of knowledge because it has a specific relationship it cultivates for the good of the other. Women now, we seem to be much better at giving to our husbands, constantly producing for him. Where in the beginning, I think it was Adam did a much better job before the fall than after. He's been a lot busier since then doing other things. Wisdom and understanding, you can acquire that if you're diligent enough. But not everyone acquires the ability to apply information to human relationships and make them good. It's intuitive. It comes with experience, but most of all, the spirit of knowledge comes with selflessness. It gives itself away. You know, men often don't know how to know their wives. Ladies, we know our husbands, don't we? We understand them, but they just don't get us. We think if you loved me, you would know what I want you to do. Because that's the way we are. We just already know what they're thinking, and we know what they're going to do before they do it. Because we're more intuitive. We have a better grasp on the spirit of knowledge. And that's why Peter has to say, men, dwell with your wives according to knowledge. Because they need to work on it more. Since the fall, they fell farther than we did in the spirit of knowledge. So they're going to have to work on that. And this is so neat. When I thought of this as I was getting ready to teach on it, it's not that they just don't get us. It's that it's written plainly in the Torah that they don't. And God made a plan for them to learn it the first year they were married. And I have never read a marriage book or seen any sort of marriage help advice that ever included this. We've heard all sorts of stuff. What is that, Total Woman, and how to dress for your husband to keep him interested, and all the stuff that women are supposed to do to keep men drawn and engaged in the marriage. But listen to this. Deuteronomy 24:5. When a man takes a new wife, he shall not go out with the army, nor be charged with any duty. He shall be free at home 1 year, and shall give happiness to his wife whom he has taken. Did you hear that? What is a man's number one duty as a newlywed for 1 year? Now, don't ask me why she needs to be cheered up for a year after she gets married. I don't understand that. Is this the impossible commandment? Is this the impossible dream? No, he wouldn't have given us an impossible commandment. It's just unnatural. He gave you an unnatural commandment because we're still thinking with the natural man. It's foolishness to us to think a man would devote his first year of marriage to making his wife happy. If it sounds foolish to us, it's because we're too indoctrinated into the world. We're too indoctrinated into the flesh to believe that a man would devote his first year of marriage to making sure he knew how to make his wife happy, to developing his relationship with her. Now, how many of you in your vows, I'll find out how old you are, because it was in mine. How many of you promised to obey your husband? I did. I don't know if it's, I think the more recent ones, they've probably taken it out there. I promised to obey my husband. How many of you had a vow where the husband promised to make his wife happy for the first year? I've never heard it in there. It's not in there. You've never heard that probably in a vow, but it's in God's Word that a man needs to learn how to live with his wife according to the spirit of knowledge. Hundreds of marriage seminars, I'm sure, are out there, but how many of them build anything around this verse? And it's not an idle word for us. Not natural. But the Torah teaches us spiritual affection, not natural affection, no, but spiritual affection. The goal of the commandment is to create a pattern for a lifelong relationship, a lifelong marriage. They say it takes 60 repetitions to create a habit. If there are 365 days in a year, then you have the opportunity to lay down 6 repetitions of the 60 repetitions needed to form a habit. So if the spirit of knowledge was the spirit that moved on the 6th day of creation to inspire the creation of Adam and the fashioning of his bride, then don't you have the perfect number for teaching the spirit of knowledge to a newlywed couple? If he did that for a year, he will acquire the spirit of knowledge. If for the first year of his marriage, he works on finding out how to develop his relationship, a deep relationship with his wife, and what she likes and what she doesn't like, what makes her happy and what doesn't make her happy. See, what men don't want to do is talk to us. Some men are talkers. A few men are talkers. But there's more women talkers than men talkers, right? The longer they go, the less they want to talk. They just want to sit in their recliner and watch TV, right? Or go out and putter in the workshop or whatever it is they do. But if they acquire a habit in the first year of marriage of having meaningful talk with their wives, for the rest of their marriage, they will understand that that's important to their wives. Don't give up, guys. I hadn't got to the ladies yet. You're looking a little desperate right now. The alternative to the spirit of knowledge is something we call selfishness. And it's a spirit that cares first for your own happiness, not for your wife's. This creates a very shallow relationship, and it is not one that will stand the test of time, or if it does, it will suffer years of conflict because selfishness will constantly strive against the spirit of knowledge that was set in place for your marriage on the 6th day of creation. It will create disunity and an unhappy family. Every Chinese restaurant I've ever been to has a meal called the Happy Family. I don't know why I thought of that. To cheer up your wife in the spirit of knowledge is to enrich yourself spiritually. To tend to and love the other is to tend to and to love yourself. To tend to your own needs and happiness first is to enrich the natural man at the expense of the spiritual man. Now, if that sounds foolish to you, then the spirit of knowledge has eluded you. Do I need to say that again? Okay. To tend to and to love the other is to tend to and love yourself. To tend to your own needs and happiness first is to enrich the natural man at the expense of the spiritual man. If that sounds foolish to you, then the spirit of knowledge is eluding you. In other words, men, if you will tend to your wife, you have just tended to yourself, because she is your own flesh. She is you. I mean, you're taught that in different places in Scripture. We couldn't read everything, but you remember reading that. You know the Scriptures. There are men who have never had a real relationship with their wives because their entire married life has been founded on a principle that the wife is to meet their needs first, or that their only obligation to her is financial, not relational. All good things grow in the order of creation. God didn't make the trees first. He penetrated us with light first. He separated the waters from the water. Then he separated the dry earth from the water. Then trees could grow. Everything grows in order of creation. So Adam's heart sacrifice preceded his wife's. Your sacrifice is going to have to precede hers. The evidence of your love will have to precede your Sabbath rest together. If you honor the weaker vessel, it means you're going to have to treat it as you would a fragile, precious object. You demonstrate to others how valuable a vessel she is because you treat her like she is a priceless treasure. Abraham treated Sarah like what her name said, like a princess in his home. You don't ignore her. You don't chain her up like a dog. You don't bark at her. You don't shout at her. You don't belittle her. Or you don't allow your children, your relatives, or anyone else to do that to her. Because she's priceless. She is your princess. And her happiness is the shalom in your home. Her happiness is your happiness. The spirit of knowledge in Hebrew is da'at. It's spelled dalet ayin tav. Dalet is the door. Ayin is the eye. And the tav is the mark that goes on the forehead. You can read about it in Ezekiel. And this is pointing you as a husband back to Yeshua has said, behold, I stand at the door and beat it down, kick it down, barge right in. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If you don't answer the first time, I run off. No, that's not our Messiah. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, then I will come in and fellowship with him. He doesn't threaten to break the door down. He doesn't scream through the door. He doesn't pound on it. He respectfully requests entrance and then patiently waits to be heard for an invitation, even though his own spirit created us. See, he has a right to come through the door. He has a right. He created us. But yet, as our example, Yeshua stands there and waits for us to answer his voice. So once he's been voluntarily admitted through the door, the dalet, he says, I will dine with a gentleman with you. And next is the ayin, the eye. He says, I will actually see my bride, not in the flesh. Remember, Hagar had a child of the flesh. It's a mockery. He says, I will see you in the spirit. I will lift up my eyes. And that is the way you have to see your bride. You have to see her in the perfection of the Spirit. It's too many times we look at our spouses and we do not see the perfection of the Spirit. We see only the blemishes of the natural man and the flesh. We have to see our bride in the perfection through the eyes of Yeshua. That's part of the spirit of knowledge. Respectfully going through the door. Using the eyes of the Spirit to see her without spot, without blemish. And then what do we see? The tav, which is the mark. Read about it in Ezekiel 9, 4 through 6. That mark in the forehead is a mark of holiness, something that is set apart, and it exempts that person from judgment, from God's wrath. Now, wouldn't it be the most horrible thing in the world if your wife were exempted from God's wrath, but not yours? Got awful quiet in here. Got real quiet in here. She is your own flesh. Do you see her in the perfection of the Spirit? Has she escaped God's wrath and judgment through the blood of the Lamb? And can she escape your wrath? We'll stop there. Wives, your turn. We may go back to them just for a second. Ladies, the fear of Adonai. The spirit of wisdom for us begins with reverencing our husbands. That means obeying, and we don't like that word. I know we don't. It means cooperating with our husbands. And I'll just tell you a little story. It takes me 45 minutes to get to work if I go the long way, which is the parkway. Now, if I go over the river and through the woods, through Foggertown, I can get there 10 minutes faster. It's not Torah, you understand, how I get to work. My husband does not want me to go the back way when I'm coming home at night when it's dark, because he's worried about my safety. And there's something inside of me that just rises up when he says, I don't want you going the back way when it's dark. I think I'm old enough at 40 something to know which way I want to go home from work. And I think I might enjoy that extra 10 minutes after I get home. Is that the spirit of reverence? Is that respect for my husband? No. No. You know what I do? Every night I drive the parkway and I give up my 10 minutes because he is my holy husband and he has my best interests at heart. And if I were to go the back way, I would be in disobedience, not to my husband, but to the God who gave him to me. He gave me a righteous husband. He gave me a God-fearing husband. And why in the world do I think I could improve on that? That's what the spirit of reverence is. It's understanding that obeying your husband is obeying God. It's a voluntary attitude. I looked up the word submissive in the text. It means a voluntary attitude of giving in, cooperating, assuming responsibility, and carrying a burden. Don't make it hard on your husband. Don't just argue for the sake of arguing, getting your way. It means we cooperate with our husband's request without copying an attitude, and you know what I mean, because you do it too, or acting like a martyr, because you do it too. Now, this is where we get into a little bit of trouble. There's a million things we could discuss, okay? An hour's not going to do it. There's a million what-ifs. But here's a hint. Men, if you're trying to get your wife's support and her attitude is not one of cooperation, there's only one thing I can suggest. I mean, it comes from the text. Don't assume that she's rebelling against the spirit of reverence, because we read that in the third part of the Torah portion where the issue came up with Hagar and Ishmael and that mocking spirit. Backtrack yourself and go back and see if you're truly operating in a spirit of knowledge. If you force her, shame her, or sulk her into doing it your way, she's not submitted. She's not been obedient, and all you've done is gotten your way, which is not the spirit of knowledge, and you've become like Nimrod, the mighty hunter, and you've reduced her to the role of a child or a beast, which was also created on the sixth day. But you can hunt it, train it, or force it to obey human commands. If you have control issues, you are going to miss the voice of God speaking through your wife, just like Sarah's in this portion of which Adonai told Abraham, listen to her voice. If you are accustomed to making your wife happy, you are more likely to hear the voice of prophecy speaking through her than to frame her words as being uncooperative or accusing her of challenging your authority and leadership in the home. And you are less likely to miss God's will for your life. Okay, that's just a little, if we were doing a flow chart and you run into a brick wall on this, on the cooperative thing, that's where you can back up and check this. But like I say, there's a million little branches on the flow chart we could go down. But back to the ladies. I mean, unless he's asking you to sin, we have to reverence our husbands. We cannot say we reverence God if we do not reverence our husbands. Disrespect toward our husbands disrupts the peace of God in our homes. A lack of reverence in the home creates, and you're not going to like this, a lack of reverence for your husband in the home creates an un-Sabbath. You're not going to have the peace of the Sabbath if you don't reverence your husband, because reverence is the spirit of the Sabbath. It is the ability to rest in the work that has already been done by Adonai, not us. That's what the Sabbath is. Remember, it's a total focus outside of the self so that we can prevent us and our homes from falling prey to unclean and wicked spirits. Sabbath focuses on the work of Adonai. Adam was invited to rest from a week of work that the Spirit of Messiah performed, not him. In other words, ladies, what I'm asking you to do is give it a rest. A Sabbath rest. Remember, the one trying to have the last word is rarely walking in the Word. This means that after we've made our case, we turn the decision over to our husbands and allow Him who was in Messiah, dwelling with us and loving us according to the knowledge of Messiah, to make the final decision. Then we rest in it. You want me to drive the parkway? I'll drive the parkway. Happily. And not sarcastically. We just submit to it and cooperate with Him voluntarily. If our husband is in Messiah, and if he has loved us the best way he knows how according to the Spirit of knowledge, then that perfect love relationship will cast out all fear we may have concerning his choice. And we can then indeed give it a rest. Our love for our husbands and our reverence for God will cast out all negative forms of fear that will manifest in things like sarcasm, mockery, disagreement over discipline in front of the children, quarreling publicly, nagging, and 100 other ways we find to tear down our homes. Every time we are disrespectful toward our husband, we expose ourselves. We're naked. If I were to be disrespectful toward Alan in front of you, I may as well start unbuttoning my shirt and show you everything I got. Because that's what sin does. And you don't want to see that. I don't want you to see that. Alan doesn't want you to see that. But that's what sin does. It exposes what you have. That's what Adam and Eve did. When they sinned, they were exposed. You saw what they were. Disrespect toward our husband is disrespect toward God. And then it should make us ashamed when we do that. The same way when Eve was irreverent to Adonai. She lost her covering. Our husbands are our covering. Some of you wonder why I wear a head cover all the time unless I'm in my own house. I'll explain that to you someday. But it doesn't mean I'm a beaten down woman. Trust me. It doesn't mean that I'm just, going around afraid to look around any corner. It doesn't mean that Alan's got so much control over me, I don't know when to move. How many of you think I don't have confidence? No, I do. But I have that confidence because I know who my covering is, and I respect that. When I cease to respect that, I will take the cover off. But I have a very independent mind, and that cover reminds me daily, I need to respect my husband. I'm not asking you to do it, but I know me. You need to do whatever you need to do to remind yourself who your covering is so that you don't expose yourself. That's the problem with this generation. We are so indoctrinated into a spirit of rebellion. We just don't think it's our right, but our duty to challenge anything and everything that just doesn't sit right, that our husbands might do. But they're not sinning. It's not Torah what way I get to work or get home from work. He's not asking me to sin. He's just asking me to do something that makes him more comfortable. And you know what? Because he is very good at knowing how to make me happy, I am more than happy to cooperate. That's how it works. And if you have a godly husband, I hope after the service, when you get home, you just wrap your arms around him and tell you how much you appreciate him. Because not every woman has that. And if she doesn't, you don't realize how much her heart longs for it. You don't realize what a gift you have. But our children notice if we have mothers, or even sometimes these roles aren't set in stone, because sometimes it's women who lack a spirit of knowledge, and sometimes it's men who lack reverence. It'll work both ways. It's just that it's weighted this way in the scriptures to say that women need to work harder on reverence, men need to work harder on knowledge. But it doesn't mean that we don't have that spirit, or we don't need to work on both of them. Does that make sense? Just in greater amounts. But having that last word is so unhelpful in a home, especially in front of children. Unity has to be the primary focus in front of children. If you're going to disagree with your husband, if you can, save it for when the children aren't there or can't hear it, so that unity is what they see. If it's something that is simply can't wait, if you disagree, at least be respectful when you disagree. If we're self-focused, committed to our own way, committed to imposing that last word upon our spouse, we're going to have children that are tormented with things like rebellion, confusion, fear, and other spirits that strive against the Spirit of God. Because you have to ask, where are children today getting this torment? If you go into the public schools, what are they tormented with? Fear, strife, rebellion, apathy. Kids that have just given up on life. They're angry, they're foolish. All spirits of the natural man. Where are they getting that? From their parents. Because human beings have a quality of the kuf, the Hebrew letter kuf. It means to copy. They're copying their parents. And you can see this. Walk up to somebody in Walmart and just go by them. Smile at them. They'll probably smile back. Get all tense around somebody and watch them get tense back. Children mirror whatever spirits we are operating in. If you have a calm spirit, you're likely to have calm children. You will have that influence on them. So if we are dwelling with one another according to a spirit of knowledge and a spirit of reverence, then your children will begin to mirror these spirits, and the foolish part will begin to get farther and farther away from them, to disconnect. So respect him even in disagreement. And the word says that even if our husbands have gone so far as to sin, depart from the Torah, that our respect will more likely have an impact on his repentance than any word of rebuke we could offer. It's not natural, no. I didn't tell you it was going to be natural or easy. But we must be gentle with them because it is a reflection of our reverence of Adonai. And remember, the one trying to have the last word is rarely the one walking in the word. Where have I heard that before? So how about the last word? Let's live with one another in meekness, quietness, so that we can have wisdom, light, goodness, shalom in the home. If not, remember the Sodomites? Remember Hagar? They had no reverence of Adonai. They had no knowledge of him. And they couldn't see goodness right in front of them. Hagar couldn't see that well, and it was right there. God had to open her eyes. Duh, it's right there. Have a drink. He had to blind the Sodomites. There were angels right there, but it says they wearied themselves trying to find them because they couldn't see goodness right in front of their eyes. We have to work on redoing what comes natural and to make our unnatural affection an affection of the Spirit. We have to make what used to be foolishness what we now set our affection on. There are things lurking around every home just waiting for an invitation to come in, just like they were waiting for an invitation into Abraham's tent, just like they were waiting for an invitation into Lot's home. Mockery, disrespect, rudeness, sexual uncleanness, stinginess, fear, boogers. Self-esteem issues, worrying about what people think, power, dominance, bullying, control issues, depression, emotional disorders. It's all lurking around. If it didn't bypass Abraham and Sarah, it's not going to bypass us. It's still lurking, waiting for an invitation, waiting for a foothold. If we do not patrol and enforce the boundaries of creation in our children. This Torah portion teaches the importance of a balanced, Spirit-filled family, and it is a blessing that so few children have. Maybe a blessing that so few of us had. And now, we're fighting those battles that maybe we wouldn't have had to have fought had we had that in the home when we were children. And even in a two-parent believing home, the spirits of knowledge and reverence are not natural. They are not. But it is a constant work of cooperation with Messiah by the sweat of our brow daily. So ladies, we respect our husbands because it is a spiritual commandment of God. And it's the pattern of Sarah, from whom Isaiah says we were quarried. We're being, quarried out of the rock. Part of that respect is treating our husband like he is a holy Sabbath, with the spirit of reverence. Number one, ladies, accept the work that he is. Rest in it and quit bargaining. You can't bargain on the Sabbath. You can't do business on the Sabbath. Quit working on him and trying to change him. If you wanted someone else, you should have married someone else. If you need a refreshing in your first love, pray for it, or we'll pray with you. But it is your responsibility to love the man you married, not the man you want to make. This does not absolve him from personal growth, nor does it mean you should participate in sin with him. But no tree of righteousness ever grew because we nagged it, shamed it, was rude to it, or tried to saw its limbs off. You've ever seen a tree grow like that? Quit trying to prove how much holier, smarter, and more capable we are. It's disrespectful, and it will never motivate him to do anything. If it's working for you so far, go ahead. But if it's not working, stop. It's not something that will motivate a man. God says he will grow when we respect him with a gentle spirit and kind words. Cooperate with him and watch him grow. Shalom in the home means completion and fulfillment. Shalom implies the harmonious result of all seven spirits of creation. And for this reason, our basic greeting on Shabbat is Shabbat Shalom. It means it's done. It's complete. It's all in harmony now. All work of the Spirit is complete in Messiah, and man can take no credit for it any more than Adam could take credit for the creation. He got to rest for nothing. Any work done on the Sabbath denies the work of the Spirit of Messiah and sends the signal to heaven that we prefer the work of our own hands to anything he's done for us. We prefer the work of the natural man, the flesh, Hagar, the bondwoman, to the work of the Spirit. Ladies, disrespecting a holy husband or disobeying a request that he has given in Messiah's gentle spirit of knowledge is a work of the flesh. It's the work of a bondwoman, and it will produce disobedient children. If your husband did devote his life to making you happy like the Spirit of Messiah did for us when he created the world, would you rest in it and be thankful for it? Or would you trample it, make fun of it, argue with it, and try to fix it? It is your husband who is to be treated as holy. If the guys at work are treated with greater respect and courtesy than your holy husband, then you do not have the spirit of reverence. Got quiet again. Number 2, cooperating with your husband must be without fear. That's what Peter says. He said, you'll do well if you do it without fear. This means you must quit worrying about what people would think about you. That's what made Sarah lie. If you worry more about what Adonai thinks of you than what people think of you, then you will automatically reverence his commandments. And that will lead you to respect your husband without fear. You have to be like Sarah, who obeyed her husband without fear, to demonstrate to a wicked world what the spirit of the Torah looks like in a holy marriage. Here's what it says, Isaiah 51:7. Listen to me, you who know righteousness, a people in whose heart is my Torah. Do not fear the reproach of man. That's not how you conduct your marriage. Do not fear the reproach of man, nor be dismayed at their revilings, for the moth will eat them like a garment, and the grub will eat them like wool. But my righteousness will be forever, and my salvation to all generations. That's what your marriage is. It's something enduring. What people think of you is temporary. It's going to die out. Men, back to you. Look to Abraham. He listened to his wife and valued her prophetic voice. She was his princess, not his spiritually blind maidservant. And they trained up an obedient child of promise. Because Abraham listened to Sarah's counsel, he demonstrated to future generations how to drive away spiritual darkness, how to set boundaries against a foolish heart that mocks the Spirit of God. Abraham had such a relationship with his wife that she obeyed him out of a deep relational love, not fear. As Abraham's seed, you are fashioned from that rock, that example. If you are ignoring your wife, or if you are smothering her voice with your own, then you don't have the spirit of knowledge. And you've opened the door of your home to spirits you don't want lurking around there. You know why the spirit of knowledge is associated with Yom Kippur and why we fast on that day? Why would you do without food? Because the spirit of knowledge is one of self-sacrifice. It's one of denying the flesh. If we suffer in the flesh, if you allow that natural, foolish man to suffer, you will ensure that the bride, the spiritual man, is covered. How much is your natural man willing to suffer in order to demonstrate affection to your wife when that natural man is screaming, I want my way? How much are you willing to suffer for a relationship? How many of you devoted your first year of marriage to finding out what it took to make your wife happy and to developing that deep relationship with her? Remember, Eve didn't become a helpmeet to Adam until Adam allowed the Spirit of God to remove the part of him closest to his heart. If you're not as enthusiastic about your wife as Adam was about his when he saw her, then perhaps not enough of your flesh has been sacrificed for that relationship. It's your obligation to do to your wife as Abraham did, as an example to the world of what Adonai will do to Israel. Your marriage is like a microcosm of what is coming, of a messianic kingdom. Isaiah 51:3, this is your wife. Indeed, the Lord will comfort Zion. He will comfort all her waste places, and her wilderness he will make like Eden, and her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in her, thanksgiving and sound of a melody. Is that the sound your wife makes? Thanksgiving and the sound of melody? Joy and gladness? That's where praise and worship starts. It starts in your relationship. It starts in your marriage. And then it moves. It should be present in your relationship with your children. It should be present in your relationship with the Father. It should permeate your home. And then you get in your car and it doesn't change. You get here and it permeates this building. Joy and gladness will be found in her. Thanksgiving and sound of her melody. I like that. I like that. If you're making your wife happy, how can we sit in our chairs and be still? Ladies, if we're reverencing our husbands, how can they come in here and not bust wide open? That's joy. That's where praise and worship starts. If there's oppression in here, we brought it with us. We brought it from the house. And if you bring it in here, you better request prayer at the beginning of the service. We need to chase it out of here. Pray over your homes. Pray over your relationships. Husbands, pray over your wives through the week. Pray over your children. That's where it starts. If you're not married yet, pray for your future wife. Pray for your future husband. If you have children who are married, who are experiencing problems in their relationships, pray for them, that they will understand just these two spirits. We've not discussed the 7. We've only discussed the spirits of knowledge and reverence. But look what a difference those two can make. But it's right here. It's right here. You know, it's about love. It really is. Trusting one another. So getting the last word. It's spirit-filled leadership and spirit-filled submission in the home. That's what's important. If we have the Spirit of Messiah in us, it shouldn't be so unnatural for us to love one another. It shouldn't feel so unnatural for us to submit to our husbands. It shouldn't be so unnatural for our husbands to listen to us a little bit when we want to talk. It shouldn't be so unnatural for us to find out what makes one another happy. Let it become our natural, spiritual affection. Let's let the last word be the word. Wouldn't that make sense? That the last word in any argument, any disagreement, any quarrel, if the last word were the word. So I'd like to challenge you to read the entire chapter now of 1 Peter chapter 3 when you go home today or tomorrow. That entire chapter, now that we've discussed the spirits of knowledge and reverence, he goes on to sum it up. He's not just trying to point out women submit or men get real and get deep with your wives. He's not trying to beat anyone up. He says to sum it all up, be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, humble in spirit. And he goes on through the chapter. There's some beautiful things in this chapter. And he shows you how it all works together in unity if our spirits are right. So I challenge you to read it again and to read it with your spouse. Read it to one another. And I think you can read it with a fresh understanding.